Hi, welcome to the Hockeylabs goalie slider kit tutorial. Within this tutorial, I will show you all the contents that are included within this package. I will show you all the tools you need, and I will show you exactly how to assemble this kit step by step. Let's get started. So, when you open the box, inside you will find a quick manual. You don't have to follow this manual completely, but you can just use it as a reference. For this tutorial though, I will follow this manual. Next you will find plastic inserts or anchors. Next there is a push stick to help you push these plastic inserts into place. Next there are screws, and lastly the sliders themselves. So included within the sliders are two of these small sliders. These go up here. Next there are two of these triangles. These go down here. Next there are three of these middle sliders that go on the edge here. Three of them are for one pad and three for the other pad. Next there are these bigger sliders. These are for this pad here, and again there are two for one pad and two for the other. And lastly there are two of these big squares, and these go in the knee area here. So, for the tools you will need, first of all you will need a screwdriver. Next you will need a knife. Next you will need a marker. You will also need some super glue. The super glue isn't necessary, but I do recommend it, and you will later see why. And you can also use an electric screwdriver, but this also isn't necessary. Okay, let's start the assembly. First, take one of your pads. Now, you want to pick one of the sliders that you will start off with. I usually start with these middle sliders, which go on this edge here. Now, I will be using black sliders for this assembly. The sliders are available in both black and white. So to start off, you want to place your slider in the position where you want it to be. Like this. Now take your marker and mark all four holes. Now that you have your four markings, take a knife, and we will now make a small line here in the middle of the markings. This will serve as an opening for the plastic inserts so that we can get them underneath the pad skin. Okay, so now that you have your opening, you want to take a plastic insert and stick it underneath the pad skin. Now you can use your push stick to push the slider into place. Now, before I do this, I just want to give you a quick tip. Before you start placing the inserts in place, I always pre-drill the inserts first before I insert them. This is because when you don't pre-drill these and you just put them underneath the pad skin and then try to drill into them, since the foam is quite soft underneath, when you try to tighten it, it can start moving away. So this way, when you pre-drill it, it's going to screw in much easier. So now that you have your opening, so before you start placing your inserts in the pad, I always recommend to pre-drill them first. This will make sure that it's going to be much easier to tighten them when you put the slider back on. So now we can start putting the inserts underneath the pad skin through the opening that we just made. First, I want to give you a quick tip though. Before I start doing this, I always pre-drill my plastic inserts first. This will ensure that it's going to be much easier to tighten the screws later when we will be installing the slider. So now we can start putting the inserts underneath the pad skin. Before we start doing this though, I just want to give you a quick tip. Before I insert the plastic inserts, I always pre-drill them first. This will ensure that it's going to be much easier to tighten the screws later when you are installing the slider. So just pre-drill this first, and then once you have that, once you have your markings and your opening, we can start inserting the plastic inserts. So just stick it underneath. Now you can use your push stick to push the slider in place. Now we want to get it underneath this marking here. Now try to get this as center as possible. Okay, I think that's good. Now onto the other one. Now that you have your inserts in place underneath the markings, since we have pre-drilled them first, what I always do is I take a screw and I just try to screw it in the hole. And there it is. So I always do this before I install the slider to make sure that the sliders are centered correctly. This way, when you check the inserts first, like this, before you install the slider, it's just going to make sure that there won't be any problems when you try to install the slider, and it will make sure that it's going to be easy to tighten it. Now I can feel that this one isn't centered correctly, so I'll take the screw out and I'll try to move the slider a bit. And now I can feel that it's centered. This one is centered. Okay, this one is also centered. So, the point of doing this was to make sure that all of these inserts are centered. Now that we know that they are centered, we can remove the screws. So, now we have all the inserts in exactly the right places, and we can now put the slider in place and screw it in. But before we do that, I recommend to use the super glue I mentioned in the introduction. So this isn't really necessary, but I do recommend to glue this opening that we made so that after some time it doesn't start ripping or water doesn't get into it. So I always just put some glue onto here. Okay, so now that you have your inserts in place, your opening is glued, you can now put your slider into position. And we can start screwing in all the screws. Okay, so now that you have finished this slider, you can move on to the next one, then this one, then the small one up here, and also these two wider ones, which will go here and here. Now, for all of these, it's going to be exactly the same process as this here. So just place it down, mark your holes, then cut out an opening for the inserts in the middle with a knife. Then take your inserts and insert them underneath all the markings. Then, like I just showed you, I recommend to screw the screws into the plastic inserts without the slider first, to make sure that all the inserts are centered correctly. This will ensure that when you are screwing in the slider, that there isn't going to be any problems, that the sliders aren't going to move away. It's just going to make the whole process much easier for you. Then, once you have done that, you can take out the screws. I then also recommend to glue the opening. And once that is done, just place your slider on the holes and screw it in. So just like we did this one, just repeat this for these other ones that I just showed, and then I will show you how to do the other ones, which are the square and the triangle. So, now that you have all of these done, we can now move on to the last two parts of this assembly, which are the square here and the triangle here. Now, for all of these, until now, you have used the same method that we used in this first one, where we just marked the holes, then cut an opening, we inserted the plastic inserts underneath, made sure that they line up with the markings, and then we screwed it in. Alright, let's start with the square. So, with this specific part here, as you can see, there is no foam here. The fabric is quite thick, but there is no foam, so there's really nowhere to put the plastic inserts here. So what I'm going to do in this situation is, since this is quite thin, I can just put the plastic inserts underneath here, and then when we close this, they will be hidden away, out of sight. Now for this, I'm going to use a drill, and I will just drill 4 holes through these markings. This isn't necessary, you can just use a normal screwdriver and screw right through the fabric. But this way it's going to be a bit easier when we make the holes. Okay. Now that we have the holes drilled, we can simply just put the plastic insert underneath like this and screw right through. So for this I'm going to actually get my square piece first and then screw the screws, unlike in the first method, because we can easily line this up since we can see underneath now. So I will screw in the screws first. Okay, now that the screws are in, we can look underneath and we can see the screws sticking out. So now this is going to be much easier than the first method, because we will simply just line up the insert with the screw like this and screw it right in. So you can just hold the insert with one hand on one side and then screw on the other side, and there it is. So now we'll just repeat that for the rest of these. So now that you have screwed in the screws into the plastic inserts, and it looks like this, you can simply just close this and hide it away. I definitely recommend this method over the first method. So if you have a pad that has something similar like this, where the fabric is really thin and you can take it off like this, then I definitely recommend this method of the first one, since much easier when you can actually see underneath it and have access to it underneath. It's really easy to screw it in like this. Okay, so now we can do the last part, which is the triangle. Now with the triangle you can either put it like this, or you can put it like this. I personally prefer it like this, because as you can see, this part here moves, and when you have a plastic insert here in the middle where it moves, it can get loose after a while. So yeah, in my opinion, it's better to put it like this, so no part of the slider is on the moving part of the pad. So for the installation of the triangle, it's going to be exactly the same as the first sliders that we did, so these ones. You will simply just mark the holes like I have here, and then you will make a cut. In this case, since the markings and the holes in the slider are like so, it's probably better to do two cuts, so one in the middle of these two and then one in between these three here. So just make these cuts, take your inserts, put them underneath the pad skin, then screw in the screws into the inserts and make sure that they are centered, and then take out the screws, put in the slider and screw it in. And that's going to be all, so let's start. Okay, so now that you have the triangle finished, the square finished, then this should be all for this pad. Now simply just repeat the same process on the other pad, and that should be all for the assembly of this kit. I hope you have enjoyed this tutorial. If you have any questions, feel free to leave them down below. Thank you for watching.